So the M1 Macs are here, and a lot of people are wondering with this new power that these devices have, are they any good for gaming? And something I've been doing a lot this year is testing World of Warcraft out on various Intel Macs, and I was very curious to see how World of Warcraft would run on the M1 given it's a brand new architecture, and it was my expectation that this game would run using Rosetta to do the translation layer, and therefore it wouldn't be particularly well optimized. But much to my own deep shock, Blizzard actually did optimize World of Warcraft for ARM for these new Macs. I could not believe that, and when I heard that, I just thought to myself, I need to test this. I really have to. So what we have here is an M1 MacBook Air, which is an interesting device because it doesn't have a fan. And something that probably just my OCD or whatever, but always bothers me about gaming on a laptop is having to listen to the fan spin up. And I almost always just have to resort to headphones because even if it's not particularly loud, I just find it distracting. It's not like a desktop where you can just put it behind your desk and pretty much ignore it. The fan is right there in front of you. So I thought there'd be a decent, unique experience to having a no-fan MacBook Air. But that does come with a limitation, of course. You don't have active cooling. As the M1 heats up, you are purely relying on the heat dissipating into the chassis in order to cool the device, which means you can't set the settings overly high. It's not just a factor of, can I get this game to run at 60 frames per second constantly? It's also, how do I prevent it from getting too hot to the point where it needs to thermal throttle? Because if you thermal throttle, then you'll find that your frame rate goes from maybe that constant 60 down to maybe 30, 20 FPS, which is very unpleasant, especially if you are just enjoying such a fluid game. So I'm going to quickly show you the settings I'm using for the M1 MacBook Air. I've found this to be a good balance between decent image quality, a consistent frame rate, and crucially, avoiding that thermal throttling. That is something that took a bit more time because you can definitely get the settings higher if you accept that after 20 minutes your performance will drop. But for me, that isn't acceptable. So I've set these settings reasonably modest, but I think it does give very good results. And to demonstrate these results, I'm going to use my tried and tested method where I'm just going to be flying throughout some zones. I'll start out with the early zones like Mulgore, and I'm going to move up into the Shadowland zones, which are brand new, to give you an idea of how this game handles the various environments throughout the game. And this should also be pretty reflective of how dungeons run. In terms of raids, they can be quite demanding, and because I don't have a practical way of doing a raid right now in World of Warcraft, I may have to come back to you guys on how it performs in raids. But I do find that what you see from these flight path tests is pretty reflective of how the game is going to run overall when you're questing out in the environment, doing some group stuff, maybe in a capital city in the less busy areas, so on and so forth. So with all that in mind, my impression of the MacBook Air playing World of Warcraft is very positive. I'm actually shocked at how well the game is running on a no-fan device. That's a very crucial thing to keep in mind. It is running very cool. Like, that's a question I've got on my previous videos on this sort of topic, is how hot is the laptop getting? And I can tell you that the trackpad is almost as cold as when you're not using it. The keyboard, it is warmer, absolutely, but it is not hot, so it's a very comfortable temperature, I think. And if you really can't stand any kind of heat under the keyboard, you can always use an external keyboard, but it doesn't feel like it's getting hot. There's a little bit of warmth underneath, so if you're using it on your lap, maybe I'd recommend just quickly grabbing a cushion so you can put a layer between the laptop and yourself to avoid that heat. But the thermals feel very, very good, which is a big difference from all of the Intel Macs that I've been using to play World of Warcraft, where you'd have these very loud fans. They'd get very warm over time. Like, after an hour, they would be hot. I think I would use the word hot, whereas the MacBook Air just seems to stay cool, even at maximum brightness, for a very long time. And an extra bonus is that the battery life seems to be outlasting those other Intel Macs because the M1 is more efficient, essentially. So even though this is maybe not the no-brainer winner of all the Macs I've tested, because I think overall the MacBook Pro 16-inch probably is a little bit better for playing World of Warcraft. You have a bigger screen, it has more raw power to run the game at higher settings, and you can do that with the fan, which does allow it to run at consistent frame rates for longer. But it is definitely a unique consideration, because I wouldn't just say that the MacBook Pro is at the top and maybe the MacBook Air is second. I would say that the MacBook Air offers unique play experiences that I don't have with the MacBook Pro. Because say I'm gaming on the couch while watching TV, for example, the 16-inch Pro is quite heavy, and over time on my lap it can feel a bit uncomfortable. And also, again, same situation, because we're in lockdown, so I'm doing this more than I'm going out, right? But say I'm in the living room watching TV and I'm muting the game because I just want to listen to the TV. Well, on the 16-inch MacBook Pro, I can still hear the fans, which is kind of annoying. On the MacBook Air, I can mute the MacBook and it is just dead silent, and I can just listen to the TV. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who does this kind of thing a fair bit. So that is a very interesting thing to consider, because it's not always about raw power. Sometimes there's some simple practicalities in how a game is running on a particular device. And for me, the MacBook Air is opening up a new dimension. Like, I thought the 13-inch MacBook Pro would do this already, the old Intel one, I should say. I haven't tried the M1 13-inch Pro, but the fans would turn on after a while and it would get warm. So it was getting close to doing that kind of thing where it's like a casual bring it around the house gaming device, but it wasn't quite there. Whereas the MacBook Air, as long as you are realistic with the settings, seems to genuinely be very, very good. Now, as excited as I am, it is important to be realistic. The M1 is a fantastically efficient system on a chip, but it is not the most powerful solution out there, particularly on the graphics side. So as I do these sorts of comparisons and discussions, it's not because I'm trying to convince anyone that a Mac is the best place to play World of Warcraft. It's more because, like me, there are people out there who just enjoy the Mac ecosystem. They like how it works seamlessly with their iPhones and their iPads, etc. But they also like to do some gaming on the side, maybe on the go. And it's very comforting, I think, to know that you can do that on your MacBook without having to buy a separate PC, because you know that maybe it won't be the best possible experience on the Mac, but it will be a very playable experience. So as always, people, thanks very much for watching and see you next time.